Hey, I'm Lex, and you're watching an advertisement. That's right. This is a project that I put together for the DMs Guild called Narfell. And what we're going to be doing right now in this video is sort of going through it, seeing what the book contains, what kind of features the document has, and then maybe afterward you'll think, wow, that's cool. I want to pick that up. So, first things first, this is Narfell. It's a setting guide for 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, but never fear, if you're not into 5th edition, there is a lot, and I mean a lot, of very system agnostic material in here that you can use for adventure seeds and adventure construction in pretty much any sort of fantasy RPG that you like. Narfell is a region within the Forgotten Realms. It's in the far north. It's kind of between the Anarok Desert and the unapproachable east. Not an area explored very much in the lore, so I wanted to take it, flesh it out, kind of reference as much material as I could find on it and put that together. The first thing you're going to notice is this is not laid out like your typical 5th edition document at all. It's landscape, it's optimized to be used on digital devices, and the art is sort of a collage of public domain work. Now, you can thank our wonderful, wonderful layout artist for that, who I will get to in just a moment. But he put a lot of visual style into this. So let's move on to our credits page. And we've got the people who worked on this. So the writing team and the art team. All the commissioned art for this, by and large, are maps with one exception. And then Gontijo, the layout artist, sourced all the public domain art that is in here, that he's put together, recolored, all that. Very cool. We're going to get to some of these writers in a little while when we get to their sections, but it's I couldn't be happier with this book in terms of that stuff. But let's get to the table of contents. We have in this book the foreword, where I talk about the project. We've got the Lands of Nar, which is just the general overview of the area. We have past and present of the region. We've got a timeline. We've got locations, both minor and major. Then we have a section for players with class options, a section for dungeon masters with game options, and then we have items, few monsters, and the crown jewel of the document, the faction adventure generator, which is what Brian Yaksha, any award-nominated Brian Yaksha, worked on for us, which is, we're gonna get to it, but it is the coolest part of this gosh darn book. So let's just talk real quick about those who care about lore, the kind of lore I'm drawing from. We are taking inspiration from Forgotten Realms stuff, going back to the first Forgotten Realms campaign setting, although I mostly cited the revised version in 96, but it's a very similar text. And then other TSR stuff, so we have references to the Monster Manual 1 and 2. There's some stuff from like Planescape in here. I found some really interesting Planescape stuff from the Faces of Evil book. There's some other Forgotten Realms campaign settings and kind of the 3rd edition expansion of the Forgotten Realms that we saw in the early aughts. Then we also drew from outside of official D&D stuff some things from Slavic folklore just for inspiration. And gosh, did I reference a lot of little things from magazines and novels and other stuff that I pulled from online wikis, because those were too many random books to track down. But yeah, so we took a lot of really great canon stuff about the region and expanded on it for this book. Now, you're going to see, if you're familiar with the region, we've got the stuff on the past, and you're maybe, if you're very familiar with it, going to notice some of the things we tried to add here. Mostly with the region, with the peoples in the region, and with the past and all the other canonical stuff. When we added things, we attempted to make things more nuanced. I think a lot of the times the ancient empire that used to rule Narfell, they summoned demons, and they were thought like, oh, they're just bad, they're evil, they're just demon summoners, and they probably worship demons, and oh, they're all just bad. I tried to give some more context to that, a little bit of nuance, not to say that they were good guys, but just kind of to give you a little more ambiguity so you can do more with your storytelling. We also changed up the way they are presented in the modern day, the people that are living there, to sort of make it, honestly, a little more palatable. There is some unfortunate descriptions in those older books that we did away with. Then, in terms of the timeline, which I think we took mostly from the History of the Realms book that was put together, and from a couple of other little sources, just kind of get you every historical event that is relevant to the region. Tried to fit that in here, and then added a couple that would allow us to flesh out the factions and some of the other stuff that's going on in this book, so you have more to draw from if you are making a game in there. I will also point out every page is equipped with a hyperlink back to the table of contents, and then the table of contents can jump around to different places. So it is very easy to sort of go back and forth in this book. Let's look at the locations briefly. We've got this beautiful, beautiful map of the region. And what's cool about it is it is also hyperlinked, so you can click on the different locations on the map and you will go to that entry on that page. Not everything is clickable, like the capital of Rashomon, not a thing, but a lot of the other relevant places. And the locations that we have in here are split into sort of minor and major locations. So minor locations are going to have a paragraph or two of text just talking about what you're going to find there, whereas major ones are going to be a little more like a dungeon, and they're going to have a lot of encounters in them. So let's go ahead and jump to Hark's Finger, why not, which is a major location. So we've got this great map for it. And we have a brief history of it, and then we have basically 5 areas within this location, and that each kind of have their own specific flavor to them that adventurers can explore and get a little bit of a different sort of theme with each. And each of our major locations is split up this way. The maps are not gridded out, so they're not meant to be run in the sense of like putting tokens on them, but more just to give the game master an idea of what the structure of this kind of dungeon is supposed to be like, and then you can grid some stuff yourself if you'd like. But to go to the encounters, we have D6 tables for each of those 5 sort of areas or zones in each major location. And they make reference to stuff that's in the world, like the Plundered Vaults. There's red wizards running around there. None of these encounters are written in a sense for challenge rating, so we don't have specific monsters cited usually, with a few exceptions, and they are not written with like, they don't say, oh, 2d6 ghouls attack you or something like that. It's more that we're trying to give an adventure seed or an encounter seed to the game master that they can then incorporate in their game and expand on it as much or as a little as they want. It could just be a quick thing the adventurers run into, or it could be sort of a pervasive thing throughout the zone that they're going to have to deal with. Now, jumping back to the table of contents, let's look at some of the other sections. We have our player-facing stuff, which is going to include things such as a background, but we've also got a subclass in here. Yeah, we got the Demon Binder, which I have made as a Warlock subclass. That's all the kind of things that you'd hope for in a Warlock subclass, and also some fun downsides because you're commanding demons, and demons produce corruption, and there's some gross bad stuff that happens. So yeah, that's pretty much our player only section includes those 2 things. Then in our game master section, we have really cool alternative rules for cold exposure. So these make things way more brutal if that's the kind of thing you want in your game, and it's just sort of gives some different DCs for making checks. It's all really about stacking exhaustion, but creating a system so that you can figure out what kind of saving throw the players are going to make based on weather conditions, the kind of snow gear the players are wearing, and what have you. So those are the cold exposure rules. We've got a great generator for the people that are going to be met in the region. Then we get into items where a lot more lore comes into play. And also some bonkers powerful items because I just wanted to go there with it. But also some cool utilitarian stuff and whatnot. Let's jump ahead to the monsters. Wow, look at that. And we only have 3 big bad monsters that are in this book. Most of them, like I said, are based off of Slavic folklore because there really wasn't a lot of areas. There weren't a lot of special named monsters in a lot of the lore we were reading that hadn't popped up elsewhere. So we kind of decided to draw from other sources for those. But I think we've got some great ones. There's also a constant theme with these monsters of there being some kind of folkloric remedy to drive them off or keep them away. So you can kind of avoid them if you know what you're doing. Then we also have things like a specialty horse for the region. We have a dog, because it's great to have sled dogs. It's good stuff. But that's all that. Let's get to the Faction Adventure Generator, written by Brian Yaksha. It's very cool. So in some of the old texts, there was talk about locations and kind of the factions that live there. But a lot of them really weren't fleshed out much beyond a sentence or two. So I basically gave Brian a lot of that information, and I said, hey, can you build a narrative adventure generator tool to allow game masters to create a plot within this area? And wow, he exceeded expectations. There is so much cool stuff in here, but there's a whole system of dealing with different legs of a journey. There are different tiers to each sort of faction that are building up. A brief overview, the way it works is there's all these different factions, and they're all vying for power, and the GM can have as many or as few of them active at any given time that they want, but they kind of have things that they're doing in the background the whole time. There are signs to show to the adventurers that, like, oh, bad stuff is going on, you should pay attention. But if they don't choose to do anything about it, or they choose to deal with one faction instead of another, the one that is not being defeated or being ignored in some other way gets to grow, and they all have different threat levels. As the threat levels grow, the narrative changes. So we have things like this warlord who's on the rise, and they're trying to basically consolidate soldiers and stuff in their first tier, and then if they're not stopped, they're trying to go and gather up artifacts in their second tier, and then if they're not stopped, they're doing even more stuff, and so on and so forth. And it just is this idea that everything is escalating, so it's getting more and more dangerous the less you deal with it. If you do deal with it, the factions actually have a de-escalation thing where they can go below what they would start at, and then they get dangerous in the sense that they all get very desperate. But yeah, the factions that you're going to see in here are things like a warlord, a Draco Lich, a plague druid, and a thief king. So that's the kind of fun stuff, and each one is sort of tied to a different major location, and then their plots and their threat tiers kind of dictate what other locations, major or minor, they would be in at any given time to sort of be achieving different goals. So you can run all of that together and create all sorts of crazy stories with it. But yeah, that's the book pretty much. I mean, it's a little light on the kind of things you'd expect to see in a 5e book in terms of monsters, items, subclasses, stuff like that. There is stuff like that in here, but the real emphasis we have put on generating narrative and allowing game masters to sort of create something that feels authentic within the region, within the Forgotten Realms, and the book is there to help you create a memorable and dramatic story for your players. So yeah, that is Narfell. It's a setting guide. It's got all sorts of cool narrative stuff in it, and I hope that you can check it out, and if you do, you'll like it. But hey, thanks for watching this promotional video.